Hey guys, tonight we're drifting back to the glittering surface of the Nile, where wine flows like water and perfume clouds raise from gilded barges. We're talking about one of the most legendary queens in history, Cleopatra. And yes, you probably won't survive this if you get too close. Between the political machinations, seduction strategies, and ancient Egyptian hangovers, it's basically a one-way ticket to being absolutely owned, emotionally or politically, maybe even cosmically, by a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from, and what time is it over there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not just anyone, you're a guest on Cleopatra's pleasure barge. The invitation arrives unannounced, sealed with gold, carried by a servant who smells of lotus blossoms and judgment. You're ushered through the city of Tarsus, hot, dusty and humming with gossip. Everyone knows what's happening tonight. Rome's golden boy, Mark Antony, is about to meet Egypt's last pharaoh, and she's not just showing up, she's arriving. The Nile doesn't even look like water tonight. It's molten silver, reflecting the torches and coloured glass that line the banks. You board the barge, your feet hitting imported cedar planks covered in rugs that look too soft to step on. Then the smell hits you. Rose oil, myrrh, incense, and underneath it all the rich, syrupy tang of wine. Not just any wine, Cleopatra's wine. Sweet, spiced, and dangerously smooth. It clings to the rim of your goblet like it knows you're going to regret this later. She appears like a stage cue, draped in a robe that suggests more than it conceals, her hair coiled into some impossible design that probably took 4 people and a minor prayer. Her voice, like honey laced with arsenic. She doesn't speak often, but when she does, you lean in, so does Antony. And that's the point. Wine is her prop, her potion, her spotlight. It fills goblets, fuels toasts, loosens tongues. She uses it not just to relax a room, but to command it. While the Roman generals drink themselves into the kind of confidence that ends in regrettable treaties, Cleopatra paces herself. She sips, watches, smiles, lets the men stumble over compliments while she collects data. You learn that this isn't new for her. Back in Alexandria, she's hosted inimitable livers feasts, lavish boozy events for her elite inner circle where luxury is both armour and weapon. Every wine served is symbolic, red for power, white for intellect, spiced for seduction. The dinners aren't just dinner, they're political theatre. Ambassadors, poets, generals, all strung out on this Egyptian wine and royal attention. And the wine itself? That's a history lesson in a bottle. The Egyptians were fermenting grapes before the Romans even knew what sandals were. They stored it in amphorae, marked with vintage, origin, and even the winemaker's name, basically the ancient version of a wine label. Cleopatra takes that tradition and weaponizes it. If she pours you the rare white from the Mareotis region, it means she trusts you. If she hands you a goblet of the heavy red imported from Cyprus, maybe not. 1 goblet in, and you're feeling bold. 2 in, and Cleopatra leans closer, her fingers trailing the rim of her own cup. Her nails are painted with crushed carmine beetles. Her eyes, thick with kohl, fixed on you like she already knows what you'll say next. You wonder how many other people have thought they were the exception. Spoiler, none of them were. Even Mark Antony, battle-hardened and sun-leathered, is helpless in this glow. He drinks like a man trying to catch up to her, not just in wine, but in wit. Cleopatra lets him believe he's winning, at least for now. That's the thing, she never overplays it. The alcohol's never the seduction. It's the smoke around the fire. The warmth that disarms you before she strikes. Here's the quirky detail you didn't expect. Cleopatra and Antony once tried to outdo each other in luxury by dissolving pearls in vinegar. She dropped a pearl earring, one of the largest in the world, into a goblet of acidic wine, watched it melt and drank it. A casual flex. Historians still debate whether that actually happened, or was just imperial gossip on steroids. Either way, you can't unsee it. That's the kind of woman she was. Turning wine into spectacle, turning spectacle into power. There's debate, though, among scholars about just how effective the wine and seduction play really was. Was Cleopatra genuinely in love with Antony, or was the relationship just another calculated alliance? Some argue she needed Rome's military backing to secure her throne. Others think she and Antony were just chaotic soulmates with a shared love for theatrics and fermented grapes. The truth probably lives somewhere in the flickering shadows between strategy and desire. You watch them that night, Cleopatra lounging on her peacock-feathered throne, Antony half-drunk and fully enchanted, his sword forgotten under his chair. The music softens, the Nile drifts on. You realise something important. Cleopatra doesn't need to drink her guests under the table. She just needs them at the table, tipsy enough to reveal, hopeful enough to dream, and dazzled enough to follow her back to Alexandria. And what awaits there? A city lit by firelight and whispers, where wine is poured from silver jugs and every sip might be a test. You're not sure how many steps it takes to fall under her spell, maybe just one, the first drink. You're not just tipsy, you're a thread in her tapestry now. Welcome to the game, you wake up groggy, the memory of Cleopatra's wine still clinging to the back of your throat like a velvet ribbon soaked in spices and secrets. But now, you're not in Egypt anymore. You're standing beneath the vast painted eaves of a Chinese palace, where the air smells like chrysanthemum, sandalwood, and slow simmering tension. The banquet hall is silent for a moment, eerily so, and then a gong sounds, its low moan vibrating in your chest. You've just stepped into the court of Empress Lü Zhi, and you're already in trouble. You glance around and realise the banquet has already begun. Platters of roasted duck, lacquered pork, and delicate rice cakes line a long table draped in crimson silk. The servants glide like ghosts, never making eye contact. But it's the wine, thick golden huangjiu poured into jade cups, that feels like the true centerpiece. Each time a noble toasts the Empress, the room tenses, as if the act of drinking might trigger more than just inebriation. Lü Zhi doesn't smile much. In fact, she barely moves. She sits at the head of the table, her robes impossibly layered, her hair twisted into a crown of authority. Her eyes scan the room with the precision of a blade. No one's sure if they're being honoured or hunted. You sip your wine carefully, though not too carefully. Too cautious, and she'll notice. Too bold, and she'll notice. You're in that soft, deadly middle ground known as political survival. Here's a fact the court whispers behind silk fans. Empress Lu was the first woman to rule China in her own right, after the death of her husband, Emperor Gaozu. Founder of the Han dynasty, she didn't fade into the background as a grieving widow. No, she stayed, clawed her way into power, really, and placed puppet emperors on the throne like decorative bonsai trees. Her real strategy, though, unfurled over cups of wine at banquets exactly like this one. At these gatherings, she watched how much each man drank, who toasted first, who hesitated. The court's power dynamics played out not in declarations, but in toasts. One too many sips, and a rival might accidentally reveal who they were plotting with. Not enough sips, and you looked like you had something to hide. Lü Zhi played this game with brutal precision, her jade cup always half full, her tongue sharpened by fermented grain. You hear a cough. A courtier 2 seats down has gone pale, clutching his throat. The room doesn't react, and no one reaches for him, no one dares. Poison, perhaps? Or maybe just a particularly bad sip? Either way, no one asks. Empress Lu raises her cup. Her gaze lingers on the gasping man for a long, unbearable beat, then shifts to someone else entirely as if he were already gone. And here's your quirky twist. Lü Zhi didn't just attend these banquets, she sometimes used them as the final scene in an enemy's story. The most infamous, concubine Qi, her husband's favourite and the mother of a potential rival heir. After the emperor's death, Lu invited Qi to a private banquet. What happened next was less dinner and more horror story. According to some chroniclers, Lu had her rival's limbs removed, eyes gouged and tongue cut out, keeping her alive in a pigsty for years. That's not wine-fueled flirtation, that's wine as psychological warfare. But here's the scholarly debate that still simmers like a forgotten teapot. Was Lü Zhi truly the brutal architect of these cruelties? Or was she the victim of a centuries-long smear campaign by Confucian historians who couldn't stomach a woman wielding imperial power? Some scholars suggest that her political enemies painted her actions in the darkest shades possible to justify later erasing women from succession. Others believe she was every bit the iron-hearted strategist the records claim, and the wine-soaked banquets were just the most palatable way to thin the herd. Either way, as you sit in this lacquered room, the wine sweating in your hand, you realise something chilling. Lü Zhi isn't just drinking to celebrate. She's drinking to remember. Every insult, every slight, every weak-willed man who underestimated her. She turns feasting into forensic analysis. Her empire isn't just guarded by soldiers, it's built from the bones of those who didn't hold their liquor wisely. A servant approaches with more wine. You glance into the cup and hesitate. Lü Zhi's eyes find yours. She does not blink. Your hand moves before your brain does. You toast, you drink. It's warm, almost sweet, with a smoky bite that sticks to your teeth. When you lower the cup, she's already moved on. You're not dead. That's the best you can hope for tonight. Later, when the moon hangs like a silver sickle over the palace roofs, the banquet thins. The laughter grows louder but faker. The nobles are looser now, slurring their alliances and forgetting who they are supposed to be afraid of. You stay quiet, stay still. Somewhere someone toasts the Han dynasty. Somewhere else, a name is forgotten forever. Lü Zhi rises, her sleeves brushing the floor like ink trails. She nods once and disappears behind a curtain of embroidered dragons. The room exhales, like it's been holding its breath all night. You know what just happened. Another chapter of history has been written, not with ink, but with rice wine, silence, and the long shadows of power. And you survive, barely. Tomorrow your head will ache, and your robes will stink of smoke and fermented grain. But you'll have made it through a night in the company of Empress Lu, China's original hostess of horror and empire. The scent hits you first, thick, sweet, slightly fermented. Not wine, not mead, but something you can't quite place. Somewhere between candle wax and crushed fruit left in the sun too long. You open your eyes to velvet and smoke, the soft glow of oil lamps flickering across mosaic floors. Welcome to Constantinople, where shadows move like dancers, and reality is always a little too theatrical to trust. And at the centre of it all, reclining in calculated elegance, is Theodora. She doesn't rise when you enter. Queens don't need to. Instead, she gestures with a delicate hand, inviting you to sit. No, to lounge. On a cushion that smells faintly of cardamom and rosewater. You're handed a goblet, curved glass tinted blue, filled with a spiced wine so fragrant it makes your eyebrows lift before you even sip. It's mulled, heated, and laced with cinnamon, cloves, maybe even a touch of saffron. You take a cautious taste and it hums warmly through your body like a soft tambourine beat under your skin. This isn't just a casual gathering. This is Theodora holding court in her own way. Before she was crowned Empress of the Byzantine Empire, she was a performer, an actress, and, depending on which dusty, judgy historian you ask, a courtesan of considerable renown. And while men like Procopius tried to drag her name through every available puddle, Theodora outmaneuvered them all. She didn't just marry Emperor Justinian. She made the empire sit up and squint when she walked into the room. Here, in this scented chamber, wine is performance. It's not just poured, it's presented. A slave girl enters, swirling the drink in golden jugs, offering it to guests as if it's liquid truth. Theodora herself doesn't drink quickly. She holds her goblet like it's an extension of her wrist. A prop in a play where the script is unwritten and everything depends on your next expression. There's a whispered joke you overhear. In Rome, wine fuels armies. In Constantinople, it fuels gossip. And tonight, gossip is everywhere. The generals discuss border threats with slightly slurred urgency. The eunuchs trade coded insults. The poets drink with too much enthusiasm, perhaps in hopes of inspiration, or in hopes of forgetting they've already peaked. And Theodora, she watches it all like a bored deity who's read this play too many times. You learn a few things quickly. 1. Theodora doesn't seduce the way you'd expect. She doesn't lean forward or flutter her lashes. She speaks precisely, with pauses so long you start to wonder if you imagined the words before. She tells stories, half histories, half fables, about the gods of old, about clever women and foolish men. She lets the wine and the silence do half the talking. She'll laugh at your jokes, but only when it benefits her. Here's your historical nugget. Theodora helped co-author some of the most progressive reforms in Byzantine law, particularly those protecting women. Divorce rights, anti-trafficking laws, rights for actresses and former sex workers, unheard of at the time, and you better believe she had to fight to get those ideas through the Senate's marble maze of egos, sometimes with words, sometimes with political leverage, Sometimes, yes, with a very well-timed dinner party and the right wine in the wrong person's cup, but the stories told about her often veer into the lurid. Procopius, in his Secret History, painted her as depraved, manipulative, and impossibly scandalous, a woman who, if his descriptions were taken at face value, could outdrink a centaur and seduce an entire army in one evening. Modern scholars now debate that narrative fiercely. Was she truly that bold and cunning, or was she simply a powerful woman men couldn't categorize without scandalizing her? Was the wine-drenched seductress just a cover story for a deeply strategic mind playing a man's game with a new set of rules? Tonight, you see the balance for yourself. Theodora speaks with a man across the room, an older general who's been sipping a bit too freely. She leans in, not closely but just enough, and offers him a refill. He accepts, beaming, unaware of the trap that's probably just been sprung. Nothing as dramatic as poison, of course. Theodora doesn't need that. All she needs is for him to say one wrong thing, one loose-lipped comment, one careless confession, and then, like a cat batting a bird, she'll take her prize. The wine helps, of course. This isn't Roman rough-cut stuff. This is high-end Byzantine mulled wine, probably blended with honey and herbs known for lowering inhibitions and lifting moods. You've heard rumours that she has a personal herbalist who tailors wine blends for different situations, one for negotiation, one for seduction, one for grieving widows who need reassurance more than advice. Wine here isn't just drink, it's strategy in liquid form. And then there's the performance. Always the performance. You realise, sitting there under the soft glow of lanterns, that Theodora has never not been on stage. She just changed theatres. Every glance, every laugh, every sip, it's all choreographed. And you're both audience and a prop. Welcome to Act 2, Theodora rises, the room falling into a hush so quickly you'd think she conjured it. She walks the length of the chamber, her gown whispering against the floor, and stops by the window. Outside, Constantinople stretches like a storybook, domes and spires under a velvet sky. She raises her goblet not to the stars but to her own reflection in the glass. No speech, just that one raised glass. And somehow that's enough. The party slowly resumes. You lean back, your mind swimming not from the wine but from her, the way she commands a room without raising her voice, the way she makes seduction feel like something sacred, not about pleasure but about power. Not the kind that crumbles empires, the kind that builds them. And as the night winds down and you're escorted out with the rest of the guests, you glance back at the door, half expecting her to be standing there still, glass in hand, watching you. She isn't. Of course she isn't. That's the trick. You only see Theodora when she wants to be seen. Your boots crunch on the dry earth now, and the scent in the air has shifted to something sharper. Dust, olive wood smoke, and the faint tang of cured meat and citrus. The air tastes different here, like it carries history and judgment in every breath. You've landed in 15th century Spain, where banners ripple from castle walls and horses whinny in the courtyards. You're not here for a fiesta, though. You're here for one woman, Isabella of Castile, co-ruler of Spain, sponsor of a little trip called the Columbian Voyage, and, less famously but just as impressively, a master of the wine-glass power play. The court is gathered in Segovia tonight. Tapestries depicting battles and saints hang heavy on the stone walls. A long table stretches through the banquet hall like a miniature battlefield. Candles flickering over plates of roasted quail, manchego, and plump figs dripping honey. But as you take your seat, you're handed something far more interesting. A polished silver goblet filled with sherry. Not the kind your grandma drinks at Christmas. This is vino de Jerez, rich, dry, with a bite that makes you blink twice. A queen's drink, strategic, sophisticated, slightly dangerous. You scan the table and there she is, Queen Isabella, seated beside her husband Ferdinand, though you quickly notice she doesn't lean toward him or wait for him to speak. She commands the space around her like it owes her rent. Her dress is deep burgundy, almost wine-coloured, and her hair is tucked beneath a veil embroidered with pearls. Her eyes, sharp and unreadable, flick across the table with interest, but also with intent. Make no mistake, this is not a queen playing the gracious hostess. This is a woman hosting because it's the best way to control a room. You take a sip of the sherry. It's complex, dry on the tongue, then suddenly floral with a finish that clings like a whisper of cinnamon. It's no accident. The wine isn't just an accompaniment, it's part of the script. Isabella uses it to soften the hard edges of politics. She offers a refill not because you're her friend, but because you've said something she wants to remember or challenge later. It's like watching a chess game played with toasts. Here's your historical hook. During her reign, Isabella unified Spain, not through brute force alone, but through a series of carefully crafted alliances. Many of those began, or at least were softened, over meals and shared wine. She brokered deals with nobles who'd sworn never to serve a woman. She financed expeditions that changed the shape of the world, Columbus being the most famous but hardly the only explorer who knelt before her throne, and through it all she used her status not just as queen, but as a symbol of divine right and sharp intellect to maintain control over men who desperately wanted to underestimate her. And yet she was no seductress, not in the traditional sense. Isabella's version of seduction was colder, more precise. She didn't flirt with her enemies. She reasoned them into submission. She made them admire her until they forgot they were supposed to oppose her. But wine helped. Always wine. She didn't drink to excess. That would be unseemly for a Catholic monarch. But she drank just enough to toast victory, enough to show confidence, enough to make you forget which one of you was really in charge. Spoiler, it wasn't you. A courtier across from you tries to tell a joke, something about Portuguese wine and bad maps, but it lands with a thud. Isabella doesn't laugh, she simply lifts her goblet slightly, an eyebrow arched. The courtier clears his throat and pretends to be very interested in his olives. The queen doesn't need to speak, she just sips. Now for the strange but true. Isabella reportedly kept a personal taster on staff, not because she feared assassination, but because she hated being surprised by poorly made wine. Yes, really. She believed that the quality of a host's wine reflected the truth of their loyalty. If it was bitter or sour, she took it as a warning. If it was rich, smooth and local, that was a compliment she remembered. This obsession with taste extended into law too. Under her rule, wine production in Castile became more regulated, with entire regions developing stricter standards in a subtle race to please the crown. But her legacy, like her wine cellar, is debated. Scholars still argue whether Isabella's reign was one of visionary nation-building or ruthless religious conformity. After all, she was also the queen behind the Spanish Inquisition. Her desire for unity came at the price of persecution, exile, and fire. Some historians argue that her drive for purity stemmed more from politics than piety, a need to cement her rule by aligning herself tightly with Catholic orthodoxy. Others say she truly believed it. Maybe the truth is in her cup, an elegant blend of richness and sharpness, sweet on the tongue but potentially lethal by the bottle. Later in the evening, a visiting noble attempts to corner her in discussion. He's drunk, clearly more from ego than alcohol, and he leans too close, speaking with the confidence of someone who doesn't understand how far beneath her he really is. Isabella turns to him slowly. Her goblet is still half full. She doesn't raise her voice. Instead, she murmurs something under her breath, smiling faintly, and offers him a refill. He freezes, suddenly aware that he's made a mistake. Not because of what she said, but because now she knows his weakness, and she'll use it later. You don't catch the words, but you catch the power shift, like a cold wind sweeping the tablecloth just enough to tip over a single glass. The night ends with a final toast. Ferdinand speaks it, but everyone watches Isabella. She doesn't toast to peace, she toasts to vision, and you feel it somewhere deep in your ribs, the way she turns fermented grape into calculated ceremony. A queen who doesn't need seduction when she can simply outlast you, outmaneuver you, and outdrink you, one perfect sherry sip at a time. The air is cooler now, still, almost hesitant. The walls are thick with centuries of whispered betrayal. You've entered the French court, somewhere between velvet opulence and barbed civility. Every surface gleams, every footstep is hushed. The laughter here has a sharp edge, and no one drinks without glancing first at their cup. You're not sure if it's etiquette or survival. Welcome to the world of Catherine de Medici, where the wine is exquisite. The guests are radiant, and the consequences of trusting either can be fatal. You find yourself seated at a table that looks more like a shrine than a place to eat. Silver goblets, golden pitchers, lace embroidered with fleur-de-lis, and enough perfumed candles to make breathing optional. A servant hands you a glass of red wine, deep, almost black in colour, like a bruise you can drink. It's from the Loire Valley, you're told. Smooth, complex, favoured by queens who understand that conversation tastes better when softened by tannins and veiled threats. Catherine sits at the head of the table, perfectly still. She wears mourning black, has for years since the death of her husband, King Henry II. But she doesn't mourn like other widows. Her eyes miss nothing. Her mouth almost smiles, but never quite. She lifts her goblet with the grace of a woman who's learned to turn every sip into a performance. You mirror her, because that seems safest. Catherine didn't invent court politics, but she certainly mastered the art of hosting them. Her banquets are legend, lavish affairs with entertainment, wine, poetry, subtle accusations, and guests who sometimes leave with less ambition than they arrived with. Her kitchens introduced France to Italian flavours, and some say even the fork. But it's not the food that keeps people guessing, it's what's in the wine. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Catherine's court was the stage for more than one sudden death. And while no one can prove the poison was in the wine, well, the rumours persist like a bitter aftertaste. One particular tale haunts the air like incense. A dinner with the Huguenot leaders, Protestant nobles brought to court under the guise of reconciliation. The wine flowed freely that night, toasts were made, smiles were shared. Then days later came the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. Thousands of Protestants slaughtered in the streets of Paris. And while the massacre may have been a matter of military timing and royal orders, some historians suspect that the seeds were planted over that carefully orchestrated dinner. Peace made just sweet enough to disarm them. Maybe wine wasn't the weapon, but it was the lullaby. A little known but wild fact. Catherine was obsessed with astrology and kept a network of court seers, most famously in Nostradamus. She would consult celestial charts before hosting major banquets. The seating, the timing of toasts, even the vintage of wine, all guided by the stars. One courtier joked, not loudly, that Catherine never poured a drink unless Mars was in retrograde. That courtier mysteriously left court soon after. Possibly just a coincidence. Possibly Mars didn't appreciate the sarcasm. Your wine is good, too good. It tastes like old secrets and fresh cherries. You watch the nobles around you. Everyone drinks, but no one relaxes. You begin to understand that Catherine doesn't seduce with charm. She seduces with possibility. Each cup could be benign or lethal. Each gesture could be mercy or calculation. Her version of power isn't flamboyant. It's suffocatingly precise. Here's where the scholars get tangled. Was Catherine a Machiavellian puppet master controlling her sons, staging poisonings, and manipulating France through subtle chemical diplomacy? Or was she simply a woman in an impossible position, doing what she had to do to maintain stability during a chaotic reign riddled with civil war and religious extremism? The answer is frustratingly unclear. For every record of her diplomacy, there is a whisper of secret potions and the Flying Squadron, a group of female courtiers allegedly trained to seduce and spy for her. Fact or juicy fiction? Historians still argue over it with the energy of teenagers in a gossip circle. What's certain is that Catherine understood wine as more than a social lubricant. In her court it was theatre, a test, a political stage. Every goblet was potentially loaded, with opportunity or with consequences. Guests watched not just their own cups, but everyone else's. Who drank first? Who hesitated? Who looked too calm? Even the act of declining wine could be taken as an insult. You either toasted with the Queen or toasted against her. There was no neutral. And yet she was never sloppy with it. Catherine didn't get drunk. Ever. Her sips were measured, calculated. The wine was there to soften her image, to make her appear maternal, inviting, human. But you could always feel the wall behind her eyes. A glass of wine in her hand didn't mean safety. It meant you were being studied. Later in the evening, as dessert is brought out, fig tarts, candied almonds, and delicate pastries, you watch as a rival noblewoman leans in a little too eagerly toward the Queen. She's young, ambitious, and probably a little too convinced of her own charm. Catherine listens politely, then glances at a servant. A second later, the woman's goblet is wreath-filled, only hers. She beams. You swallow hard, nothing happens, of course. Probably nothing ever does. That's the magic. The terror doesn't come from what you see, it comes from what you don't. Did the Queen just offer a gift, or a warning? You'll never know. By the time you leave the banquet hall, the world outside feels colder, emptier. The wine lingers in your mouth, not sweet, not sour, just strange. You survived dinner, for now, but your head buzzes with questions, not just about what you drank, but what you may have agreed to without realizing it. Because in Catherine de Medici's world, wine doesn't just accompany seduction, it is seduction. Not of the flesh, but of the will. A queen who doesn't need affection, she needs obedience, and with just the right vintage, she always gets it. You're already tired when you arrive, but that doesn't matter. Nobody rests at the Tudor court, not really. The halls are too bright, the gossip too sharp, and the queen too clever. This time you've come to witness the high-wire act that is Elizabeth of England. The Virgin Queen, the Gloriana, the uncatchable chess master who managed to rule for 4 decades while being surrounded by men who either wanted to marry her, manipulate her, or remove her entirely. And while Elizabeth is famous for her intellect and razor wit, tonight you're paying attention to her wine glass, and the way she makes even a simple sip feel like a state decision. You're in a grand hall in Whitehall Palace, surrounded by gold leaf, wooden beams, and tapestries so intricate they look like someone wove an entire forest into the walls. Candlelight flickers off silver goblets. Everything smells faintly of beeswax, roast meats, and the faintest trace of rosewater clinging to courtiers who've bathed exactly once this week. A minstrel plays a lute in the corner. Everyone pretends not to hear the sour note he just hit. Elizabeth enters like a storm in velvet. She's taller than expected, or maybe it's just the way she carries herself. Her gown is a masterpiece, golden brocade with embroidered pomegranates, her favourite symbol of fertility and power, irony very much intended. Her famous red hair is coiled in loops so precise, it's as if geometry itself styled them. When she walks, everyone freezes. Even the fire seems to lower itself a notch in deference. Her goblet is already waiting for her. It's not delicate. It's tall, imposing, etched with Tudor roses and her motto, Semper Eadem, always the same. But here's the trick, her wine drinking is almost theatrical in its restraint. Elizabeth doesn't down her drink. She doesn't get tipsy. She controls the ritual. She sips slowly, deliberately, making it very clear that while you may be here to enjoy yourself, she is here to remind you who's in charge. And she doesn't toast lightly. Every time Elizabeth lifts her goblet, it's to mark something, the birth of an alliance, the death of a threat, or the gentle destruction of someone who misjudged her favour. Tonight she raises it to the Earl of Leicester, Robert Dudley, whose face flickers with the kind of emotion that says he's both honoured and reminded he's still very much not her husband. The court watches in silence. You can practically hear the collective heartbeat. Let's talk about what's in the glass. It's likely sack, a fortified white wine from Spain that was wildly popular among the English elite, a sort of proto-sherry with a rich, nutty flavour and enough bite to make even the sturdiest nobleman loosen his ruffled collar. Elizabeth's court imported it by the barrel, and though she drank modestly, she made sure everyone else drank a lot more. The more you sip, the looser your secrets. The more you talk, the better her spies do their job. Coincidence? Not even a little. Here's the quirky historical gem. Elizabeth's court had something called the Wine Office, not a joke, an actual department responsible for the selection, procurement and regulation of royal wine. It was serious business. Not only was the wine taxed, tasted, and inventoried with obsessive detail, but the entire system also doubled as a way to spy on what nobles were drinking and who they were drinking with. Wine, in other words, became a surveillance tool. Cheers to that. But what scholars can't quite agree on is whether Elizabeth's famously strict persona at court, especially during banquets, was truly her personality or a performance. Some argue she was naturally calculating, raised in peril and moulded into a master of appearances. Others suggest she longed to relax, but never could. That maybe the careful way she managed wine, only ever sipping, never indulging, was her way of maintaining control in a world that would have devoured her the moment she let her guard down. Tonight, you watch her dance this balance with elegance. A French ambassador tries to press her for a private meeting. She tilts her head, smiles demurely, and passes him a goblet instead. A silent message. We drink first, we speak later. Later may never come. The ambassador smiles, but it's the nervous kind. He knows he's already lost half the negotiation before it even began. And then there's the mask. Elizabeth adored masks, those elaborate performances with allegorical characters, costumes, music, and just enough veiled commentary to make your skin crawl. Tonight's features a goddess who refuses every suitor, declaring herself wedded to her kingdom. Subtle. When the performance ends, the Queen raises her glass to the players and claps slowly. Everyone joins in, some relieved, some nervous. No one knows if they've just witnessed flattery or foreshadowing. You glance around and notice the nobles who've had a bit too much sack. One is talking far too freely about Spain. Another is laughing just a little too loudly. Elisabeth watches it all with a look of amused tolerance, for now. Her courtiers live in a constant state of careful buzz, encouraged to drink just enough to relax, but never enough to forget they're being watched. It's like social entrapment with lace collars and violin accompaniment. As the evening winds down, she takes one final sip. Her cup is barely touched, and you suddenly realise the drink isn't for her at all. It's for you, for them. A ritual, a mirror, a performance. Elisabeth doesn't seduce with alcohol. She seduces by withholding it, by staying just out of reach, just sober enough to remember everything you said when you thought she wasn't listening. And when she stands to leave, the room bows like wheat in the wind. Her goblet is taken away. A new one will be prepared for tomorrow, because there's always another game, another guest, another performance. But the wine will always be the same, a prop, a symbol, and occasionally a very sharp knife. You sit quietly as the hall empties, the fire dying into whispers. The air still smells like smoke and rosewater. You sip the last of your drink. It's good, but not nearly as good as the way she used hers. The smoke is different here, thicker, richer, earthy, like damp wood and roasted roots. You're deep in Central Africa now, in a shaded clearing near the banks of the Kwanza River. The canopy above sways gently, filtering sunlight into fractured gold. Around you, warriors sit in a wide circle, their spears laid respectfully across their knees. They're waiting, not for a king, not for a priest, but for a queen. A queen who's as likely to bless you with a toast as she is to cut your throat if you cross her. You're about to share palm wine with Queen Nzinga of Ndongo and Matamba, so try not to choke on it. The first thing you notice is the silence. Not absence of noise silence. This is tension silence, reverence with a touch of fear. A good jug of palm wine is passed around, its sides damp with condensation, its scent sharp and tangy like overripe fruit laced with a hint of smoke. You accept it carefully, already aware that drinking here is more than tradition, it's declaration. You take a sip, and the taste hits you all at once. Sweet at first, then bitter, then somehow both at once, like honesty you weren't ready for. Then she arrives, Nzinga. She doesn't march or sweep in with grandeur. She enters, controlled, barefoot, dressed in layers of bold fabric dyed in red, gold, and deep earth brown. She wears no crown, just a necklace of carved bone, and a look that could turn a Portuguese envoy into stone. Her eyes move slowly over the crowd, stopping on you just long enough to make your spine reconsider its structure. She does not sit, not yet. There is a chair set for her, but before she reaches it, a man from her retinue drops to all fours and offers his back. Nzinga steps onto him without hesitation, using his body as a throne. The message is ancient and clear. A queen sits wherever she damn well pleases. Palm wine is poured again. This time it's ceremonial. A gourd filled to the brim passed directly to her. She takes it not with the dainty reverence of a European queen, but with the authority of a field general. She drinks deeply, not a sip. A gulp. The kind that says she has nothing to fear, not from enemies, not from poison, not even from gods. You learn quickly that Nzinga doesn't use alcohol the way most rulers do. There's no flirtation here, no veiled seduction. Her use of palm wine is deeply rooted in diplomacy and domination. She greets her guests with it, tests loyalty through it, and closes deals over it. It's how she reads people. If you refuse a drink, you're suspicious. If you drink too much, you're weak. If you match her gulp for gulp, you're still not her equal, but at least you're not useless. Historically, she played the wine game like she played the political one, strategically and without mercy. During meetings with the Portuguese in the 1620s, Nzinga was known to mirror their customs only when it served her. At one infamous diplomatic summit, Portuguese officials refused her a seat, assuming a woman would stand or bow. Instead, she ordered one of her attendants to kneel, turning him into her human chair. Then she poured herself a drink and conducted the negotiations like royalty, all while sitting on a man who dared not flinch. She walked away from that meeting with a treaty and a kingdom. The wine in your hand feels heavier now. Here's your quirky fact. Palm wine, unlike grape wine, has a shelf life of only a day or so before it goes completely sour. That means it's harvested, fermented, and consumed within hours, fresh, living, and unpredictable. Much like Nzinga herself, she kept her court flexible, mobile, and ready to pivot. Her ceremonies weren't rigid but responsive. Her rituals were designed not to impress but to intimidate. Of course, the scholarly debates swarm like mosquitoes in this part of history. Was Nzinga truly the brilliant, modern strategist many admire today? Or was she simply a brutal opportunist, playing both sides of a colonization crisis to maintain personal power? Some accounts paint her as a liberator, others as a tyrant who used slave trading to fund her armies. What's not in dispute is that she stayed in power for over 30 years, through betrayals, battles, and at least 3 failed attempts by European forces to remove her. And yes, alcohol played its part. In her court, drinking wasn't leisure. It was a code, a message, sometimes a threat. Portuguese emissaries were known to leave her meetings drunk, dazzled, and deeply confused about whether they'd just won or lost. Palm wine wasn't just hospitality, it was misdirection. Tonight, the air around the fire begins to pulse with the sound of drums, rhythmic low, like the earth is breathing. Nzinga rises. The cup is passed to you again. This time you match her gulp. The sweetness gives way to an edge of sourness, but you hold it. Her eyes catch yours. You don't blink, she nods just slightly, and moves on. No cheers, no toast, just approval, or something close enough to it. You begin to see her strategy in motion. Palm wine here is a universal solvent. It dissolves barriers, between tribes, between enemies, between sexes. In a world ruled by war and shifting alliances, Nzinga used every drop to blur lines, dull suspicions, and sharpen her edge. She drank with men who'd sworn to kill her. She toasted with priests while plotting rebellion. She poured palm wine over the graves and over treaties with equal solemnity. And when the fire burns lower and the warriors begin to chant, softly deep in their throats like the roots of trees humming, you realize what Nzinga has known all along. Wine is power if you serve it right. She walks past you, her gourd empty. You notice her human chair still kneeling, silent, unmoving. The queen doesn't look back. She doesn't need to. She's already won. The air inside this chamber is smoky and sweet, with a base note of pine and something unmistakably alcoholic, sharp, medicinal, and vaguely fruity. A fire crackles against stone walls lined with faded tapestries, and candlelight throws long shadows onto the floor. You've arrived in Stockholm, but not the polished Swedens of postcards. No, this is the 17th century, and you're stepping into the strange, magnetic orbit of Queen Christina of Sweden, a monarch who defied every expectation, shredded every rulebook, and wielded alcohol like a stage prop in her lifelong act of self-invention. Christina doesn't walk in. She bursts in like a gust of cold northern wind in human form. Dressed in men's breeches and a velvet coat too grand for a king, let alone a queen. She pulls off her gloves with the carelessness of someone who's already bored of your judgment. Her hair is loosely pinned, more dishevelled genius than royal perfection, and her eyes glitter with the kind of mischief that would have terrified more buttoned-up monarchs. She tosses her gloves onto the table and pours herself a generous mug of cherry brandy, without waiting for anyone's permission. You're seated on a carved bench that might once have been a church pew. Christina has a habit of repurposing sacred things. Around you, her inner circle lounges with a mix of noble disinterest and silent competition. These are thinkers, diplomats, poets, scholars. Some drink to impress her, some drink to keep up. No one drinks without thinking about it. Christina notices everything. Your cup is filled with brandy, the kind that smells like it might double as fire starter. You brace yourself and sip. It burns going down, sharp and biting, and then it blooms, sweet, dark, warming your chest like a whispered secret. Christina watches you, amused. Too sweet? She asks, knowing full well it's not. Before you can answer, she launches into a monologue about Aristotle, cuts herself off with a joke about the French court, and then challenges a visiting envoy to an impromptu fencing match, all while sipping brandy like it's water. This is her world, and she controls it not with flirtation or threat, but with sheer brilliant chaos. Here's the historical core. Christina became queen at 6, after her father, the famously war-hardened King Gustavus Adolphus, died in battle. She was raised like a prince, taught Latin, politics, swordplay, and statecraft. And when she came of age, she refused to marry, refused to conform, and eventually refused the throne itself, abdicating at age 28 after a reign so eccentric that it still leaves historians arguing over whether she was a visionary or a disaster. One thing everyone agrees on, Christina knew how to work a room. She used banquets and drinking sessions not just for entertainment, but for psychological chess. She invited philosophers like Descartes to court, then debated them over brandy until dawn. One guest famously described her as too learned for a woman, too unpredictable for a king, and too magnetic to ignore. Which is really just another way of saying she scared the hell out of people. And her drinking habits? They were part of the performance. Christina didn't drink to fit in, she drank to stand out. She'd throw impromptu feasts where the wine would flow non-stop, but the conversation had to stay razor sharp. If you got sloppy, she'd cut you off with a line of Socratic philosophy, and then switch languages mid-sentence just to see if you could keep up. Some nights she'd dress in full men's regalia, drink her courtiers under the table, then dismiss them before midnight so she could read in bed until dawn. But here's the fringe detail that turns everything sideways. When Christina abdicated and left Sweden, she didn't just sneak out. She held a massive farewell feast. The wine flowed, the songs echoed through the palace, and when the night ended, she rode off, dressed as a man, disguised under a false name, with a caravan of books and cases of her favourite liqueurs. She eventually converted to Catholicism, settled in Rome, and turned her new court into a salon of thinkers, poets, and papal gossip. There too, the drinking never stopped, it just got more sophisticated. Still, the academic debate lingers. Was Christina simply eccentric, or was she deeply calculated? Did she drink to escape, or did she drink to provoke? Was her gender-defying performance a cry for freedom, or a strategic move in a world too small for her mind? Some biographers suggest she suffered from what we'd now call neurodivergence. Others say she was simply too brilliant, too different, to play within the rules. Tonight, though, you're not here for diagnosis. You're here to watch her work the room. She's on her third cup now, and the talk has turned to politics. Someone dares to bring up marriage, again. Christina groans theatrically, throws back her drink and says, "I'd rather be executed than bored." No one presses further. Later, as the candles burn lower and the room starts to blur at the edges, Christina stands. The conversation stems. She walks to the window, brandy in hand, and stares out into the night. Her voice, when it comes, is soft. "Do you think history will remember me? Or just my bad habits?" No one answers. There's nothing to say. Because you know the truth. Her habits are history. The drinking, the dressing, the wandering, the ruling, the fleeing. It's all one long, strange toast to a life unrepeatable. As the fire dies and the room empties, you sip the last of your brandy. It's cold now. Still sweet, still biting, just like her. You hear the laughter before you see the room, light tinkling, almost too perfectly timed. The kind of laughter that's been rehearsed. You're stepping into Versailles, but not that Versailles. This is the miniature French court inside the most dangerous party palace in Europe, the private apartments of Marie Antoinette. The mood is cotton candy light and champagne-soaked. Silk rustles, crystal clinks, and ton-powdered wigs bob with carefully staged delight. But don't let the pastel colours fool you. This is power under pressure. And the woman at the centre of it is balancing her entire kingdom on the stem of a glass flute. You're ushered in through a side corridor, your shoes clicking on marble. A footman takes your coat and immediately hands you a flute of champagne so pale it's almost silver. Tiny bubbles float upward, faster than your heartbeat, and the chill of the glass gives you a shiver. You take a sip, it's crisp, slightly floral, and far too easy to drink. Around you, courtiers pretend not to watch you while calculating exactly how long you'll last. And then you see her. Marie Antoinette, the most mythologized queen in Europe. Her hair defies gravity, powdered and adorned with pearl combs and a miniature ship. Yes, really, a ship. Her dress is a feat of architecture, layered and ruffled, and trimmed within an inch of its life, but her posture relaxed. Too relaxed. Like someone who knows the wolves are just beyond the hedges but has chosen to dance anyway. She holds her champagne flute with perfect ease, wrist angled just so, fingers light. Her smile, pure performance, a porcelain mask she's worn so long it's become second nature. She's sipping, not guzzling, but she's sipping constantly, enough to stay buzzed. enough to float above the whispers that cling to her like perfume. Marie doesn't drink to seduce, she drinks to survive. In a court where every glance is a trap and every compliment might be a veiled insult, her champagne is insulation. It gives her just enough lift to play the role she's been cast in. The glittering foreign queen, too rich, too spoiled, too Austrian. Let's get one thing straight. Marie didn't invent decadence, but she perfected its aesthetic. Her private gatherings at the Petit Trianon were legendary. No stiff court protocols, just carefully curated intimacy, cushions, music, pastries shaped like swans, and champagne served in fluted glasses with gold rims. While France teetered on the edge of economic collapse, the Queen danced, drank, and hosted midnight masquerades in a bubble of scented oblivion. Or at least that's how the gossip went. But here's your surprising fact. Marie Antoinette helped make champagne fashionable. It had been around for centuries, of course, but under her influence, it became the drink of the French elite. Before her, champagne was rustic and unstable. During her reign, it was transformed into a symbol of effortless elegance. She reportedly even had special wide-brimmed coupe glasses moulded from her own breast, although historians agree that's likely a myth invented by later generations with a flair for the scandalous. And scandal was never far behind her. The press, the 18th century version of a Twitter mob, painted her as a degenerate, a foreign agent, a spendthrift, a nymphomaniac, a lesbian, and a political moron, sometimes all in the same pamphlet. Her champagne toasts became symbols of her detachment. Each glass she lifted was another nail in her public coffin, or so her enemies claimed. And yet, in the same breath, they copied her style. The same nobles who whispered about her excess also showed up at her salons wearing pastel silk and begging for a refill. As for the scholars, they're still divided. Was Marie Antoinette a shallow figurehead with no grasp of politics, or a sharp, intuitive survivor trapped in an unwinnable game? Some argue that she used alcohol not just as social lubricant, but as emotional armour. Others believe she drank because there was quite literally nothing else to do, no real power, no allies, and a court that functioned more like a theatre than a government. So she became the lead actress and leaned into the role. Tonight the performance is at full tilt. A string quartet plays something gentle in the corner. Courtiers flirt through fans. Someone passes a tray of macarons that look more like jewellery than food. Marie spins through the room, champagne in hand, every movement choreographed. She laughs with her ladies, twirls a lock of hair around one finger, and turns to you. You freeze. She smiles. "You're not drinking," she says, almost teasing. It's not an accusation, but it is a challenge. You raise your glass and sip. It's colder now, and you're not sure if it's the drink or the atmosphere that's making your throat tight. She nods and moves on, already bored. Around you the air feels lighter again, as if she took the centre of gravity with her. But the illusion starts to crack. A courier whispers something in a guard's ear. A courtier coughs and checks the door. Rumours of debt, unrest, and Parisian mobs buzz beneath the music like distant thunder. You realise that the champagne isn't floating Marie above the crisis. It's keeping her from drowning in it. Later, when the guests finally drift off and the music softens, you glimpse her sitting by herself. The curls are slightly wilted, the smile softer now, the mask slipping just a bit. She finishes the last sip in her glass and sets it down with care. You wonder what she's thinking. Maybe about her children, maybe about the next scandal, maybe about how many more glasses it'll take to pretend none of it is real. She doesn't cry. Marie Antoinette never cries in public. She just reaches for the next bottle, and the performance begins again. The air bites as you step outside, and suddenly everything is cold. Not crisp, not wintry, aggressively cold. Your breath fogs immediately, and your boots crunch on the thick snow. The stars overhead are shockingly clear, as if the frost has scrubbed the sky. You're standing in the middle of a frozen courtyard, and in front of you looms a structure so absurd it feels like the fever dream of a vodka-soaked architect. A palace made entirely of ice. Walls, columns, chandeliers. Ice! Welcome to Russia under the rule of Empress Anna Ivanovna, the Romanov monarch with a taste for cruelty, extravagance, and vodka-soaked spectacle. You don't walk into this party, you endure it. Inside the ice palace, everything sparkles. The floors are frozen solid, the chairs are blocks draped in furs, and the centerpieces on the table are carved swans that are literally melting under the heat of dozens of breathless nobles. There's food, of course, if you can eat it before it freezes to your fork, but mostly there is vodka. And not a polite little thimble of it. No, you're handed a glass that feels more like a dare than a drink. And somewhere amid the flickering torchlight and frostbitten giggling you spot her, Empress Anna, a heavy-set woman with a face like a statue and eyes that don't ask questions. They wait for you to get the answer wrong. She's dressed in opulent furs, dripping with jewels, and laughing softly at something a terrified courtier just said. Her goblet, silver and etched with Romanov eagles, is filled with a vodka so pure it might as well be weaponized. She drinks it like water. Anna doesn't need subtlety. She doesn't do seduction. She does domination. And in her hands, vodka isn't a social gesture. It's a test of endurance, obedience, and occasionally psychological torture. Here's the historical core of it. Empress Anna ruled Russia from 1730 to 1740, and her court was a strange blend of the barbaric and the Baroque. Elevated to power by nobles who thought they could control her, she spent the next decade proving them very, very wrong. She surrounded herself with foreign advisors, crushed internal dissent, and, most infamously, constructed elaborate practical jokes that doubled as punishments. Which brings us back to this ice palace. This wasn't a metaphorical structure. It was real. Built in 1740 on the banks of the Neva River, it was 40 feet long, carved with full rooms, beds, and even indoor fireplaces, made of ice. Why? Because Empress Anna decided to marry two of her least favourite courtiers as a public joke. The bride had once dared fall in love without her permission. The groom was a jester. She forced them to marry in front of the entire court, paraded them through town in cages, and made them spend their wedding night inside this frozen architectural stunt, naked. And yes, the vodka flowed. Every guest at that surreal wedding was expected to toast, not once, not twice, continuously. Vodka was passed in crystalline pitchers, poured into goblets so cold they stuck to your lips. It wasn't about enjoyment. It was about submission. If you refused to drink, you insulted the empress. If you drank too much and collapsed, you became the night's entertainment. It was a tightrope walk, and everyone wore silk slippers on ice. Tonight, you're in that same tightrope space. Anna gestures toward you, and a servant approaches with more vodka. It smells faintly of pine and death. You raise your glass, your hand shaking only slightly, and take a sip. It slices through your throat like a blade, then spreads like fire in your belly. Around you, the courtiers pretend not to notice your reaction. Anna does not blink. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. Russian vodka at the time wasn't flavoured, filtered, or softened. It was often home-distilled, sometimes above 50% alcohol, and occasionally laced with herbs or spices for medicinal or punitive purposes. Anna reportedly kept her personal supply guarded, favouring a particular northern distillate that could strip paint. She drank regularly and heavily, but never lost composure. Watching her drink was like watching a bear sip tea, disorienting, unsettling, and completely unforgettable. As for the academic debate, Anna's reign is often dismissed as a footnote, marked by stagnation, cruelty, and the rise of German influence in Russian politics. But some modern scholars have pushed back, arguing that her harsh rule was an attempt to maintain order in a court that had grown arrogant and conspiratorial. Others say she simply enjoyed the spectacle, that she was addicted to control disguised as comedy, and vodka was just another lever she pulled. But when you're standing here, skin numb, heart pounding, glass in hand, none of that matters. What matters is survival. Anna drinks again. A toast is made. Another. And another. The men begin to slur. One woman stumbles. The empress chuckles. You're in the eye of the storm, and the only way out is forward. She raises her goblet toward you. It's not a threat. Not exactly, it's an invitation. You toast back, the cold now so deep in your bones, you can't tell if you're drunk or just freezing to death. And still, the party continues. Eventually dawn creeps in, pale and pitiless. The fire has died down to embers, the vodka pitchers are nearly empty, the ice palace groans in the shifting light. Anna rises, her fur coat sparkling with frost, and sweeps past her court like a glacier with opinions. She doesn't say goodbye. She doesn't need to. You made it through the night. Barely. The candles flicker low in the hall, their wax pooling like slow-moving rivers over brass holders. You're not sure if the heat in your face is from the roaring fire, the vodka in your veins, or the fact that you're now stepping into the presence of one of history's most misunderstood women, Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia. Not the porcelain version with powdered cheeks from history books, but the real one. Brilliant, ruthless, and currently swirling a glass of Harilka with a glint in her eye that says she could either solve your problems or become one. You're in St. Petersburg now, in the winter wing of the Winter Palace, where the rooms are warm and wide and echo slightly from all the marble. The feast is already in full swing. Roasted duck, mushroom pies, caviar, and cheeses form a landscape of indulgence across an endless table. But the drink of the night? Vodka, yes, but also something else. Nalivka, a rich fruit liqueur Catherine introduced to court for delicate palates. Don't be fooled. Kicks like a mule wrapped in lace. Catherine enters like a ship with full sails. She's wearing a gown of cobalt blue, the hem lined in ermine, and her diamond-encrusted stomacher sparkles like it's trying to blind everyone into submission. She nods once and the music stops, just like that. Then she lifts her glass and toasts to her guests, not with syrupy flattery, but with a line in Latin that you don't quite catch. Everyone laughs. You fake it. She notices. Catherine doesn't drink for celebration. She drinks for control. Not over herself, she has that nailed down, but over the court, the gossip, the alliances, the loose tongues that make or break empires. You take a sip of your liqueur and feel the sweetness first, plum perhaps, or sour cherry. Then the slow burn that coils in your chest. It's deceptively gentle, like her. She moves through the room like a general inspecting troops, glass in hand, nodding, to each courtier, each ambassador, each foreign dignitary with precisely the amount of warmth or warning required. You get the sense that if she wanted to, she could toast you into exile. Historically, Catherine played alcohol like a piano. Not as a way to get drunk, that wasn't her style, but as a means to set tempo and tone. Under her reign, vodka wasn't just served, it was as ritualized. Toasts weren't optional. You drank when she drank and you said the right words, or you risked being quietly erased from the court. Her dinners were occasions, carefully curated lists of attendees, specific wines for each course, and just enough vodka to blur the lines between diplomacy and confession. Here's the quirky footnote you didn't expect. Catherine had a private wine committee in court, a group of experts tasked with sampling and selecting her beverages, many of which were imported from across Europe. She favoured Hungarian Tokaji and Crimean wines, and according to one record, she even experimented with aging her own infused vodkas, some spiced with cloves, others with raspberry or pepper. She wasn't just drinking, she was curating a national taste, and while she didn't seduce through alcohol in the classic sense, it absolutely played a part in her legend. Her lovers, of which there were many, and yes, the rumours are as messy as you've heard, often came into her favour through charm, wit, and yes, a shared drink or two. But make no mistake, she did the choosing. Always. The wine might have made them bold, but Catherine made the final call, and she wasn't interested in games she didn't control. There's a scholarly divide on her personal indulgences. Some accounts suggest she drank little, kept her wits sharp, and used her guests' intoxication as a kind of surveillance mechanism. Others hint at more relaxed nights behind closed doors, where poetry and vodka flowed freely among her inner circle. But what most agree on is that Catherine made court drinking part of the performance of state. Public image was everything, and if your image involved a well-placed toast to peace with Poland, while your army quietly took half of it, so be it. Tonight the performance is in full motion. A Prussian envoy tries to match her toast for toast, downing his fourth shot of horseradish-infused vodka, while pretending it doesn't taste like chemical warfare. Catherine smiles politely. She is still on her second, her eyes haven't left his face, and you can tell she's watching for the moment when the bravado wears off and the honesty seeps in. It always does. She turns to you suddenly. And what do you think, dear guest? Should the state encourage personal liberty, or must it guard tradition above all else? You sputter, mid-sip. It's not a trap, not exactly, but it's a test. Every drink here is followed by a question. Every toast hides a thesis. You answer as best you can, drawing from something you think you read in a book about Enlightenment philosophy. Catherine nods once, drinks, then moves on. It's either approval or the beginning of your quiet downfall. Honestly, same difference. The music resumes, Someone starts a round of Jahilivka, a fast-paced drinking game involving riddles and rapid-fire shots. Catherine watches with mild amusement but doesn't join. She never plays where she isn't guaranteed to win. Instead, she sits at the head of the room, sips her liqueur, and begins quietly writing something on a slip of parchment. A note? A law? A poem? a list of people to dismiss next week. The night stretches on and the guests begin to sway. You feel the burn of plum liqueur still coating your throat, the warmth of a room powder-beliered by strategy and carefully disguised manipulation. Catherine drinks again. Not deeply, not urgently, just enough. And somehow you know she's already 3 moves ahead. The heat is heavy now, dense and wet, wrapping around you like a damp wool cloak. The air carries the scent of frangipani blossoms, smoke, and something metallic that's not quite a blood but close. You've left the frost of Russia far behind and arrived on the volcanic island of Madagascar in the 19th century. The jungle presses in close, thick with life and sound, and at the centre of this vivid chaos stands Queen Ranavalona I, the so-called Mad Queen of the Highlands. And tonight, she's hosting a ceremony, a celebration, a judgment, or both. And yes, there's drinking involved, but not the kind you're used to. You're not in a palace this time. You're in a clearing surrounded by torchlight where villagers, nobles and soldiers alike are gathered in a wide ring. Drummers pound out a slow rhythm, and the scent of brewing toaka gesi, a potent rice-based alcohol, drifts across the crowd. It's homemade, sharp and sometimes illegal depending on the mood of the queen, which is fitting because her moods are legendary. Ranavalona appears at the edge of the firelight, dressed in red silk and layered gold jewellery that glints in the fire's glow. Her gaze is fierce and calculating. She doesn't smile. She appears like an omen. She walks barefoot across the packed earth, her steps deliberate, her presence both regal and terrifying. The crowd parts without a word. She's carrying a cup carved from zebu horn, filled with a cloudy, frothy version of toaka, and everyone is watching closely to see who she will hand it to. You. The servant beside you gestures. Accept it. You take the cup, which is warm from her touch. The smell hits you like a warning. Fermented rice, raw sugar, a hint of something smoky. You take a cautious sip and it sears your throat like a scolding. Rough, earthy, and nothing like the refined wines of European courts. This is not alcohol for pleasure. This is alcohol for power. Ranavalona drinks after you, her eyes not leaving yours. Her swallow is slow, measured, almost ceremonial. The crowd exhales. You're still alive, for now. Here's the thing, this queen didn't host elegant salons or champagne-soaked balls. She ruled with an iron fist wrapped in tradition and blood. Her use of alcohol wasn't about charm, it was about reinforcement, ritual, obedience. In her court, the drinking of toaka gasi wasn't a social nicety. It was part of trial by ordeal, a literal test of guilt or innocence. A person accused of a crime might be forced to drink a poisonous blend known as tangena, sometimes mixed with alcohol, and if they survived, they were declared innocent by the spirits. If they died, well, problem solved. It sounds medieval, but it wasn't some ancient relic. Ranavalona embraced it fully, using these rituals to eliminate enemies, suppress dissent, and enforce her authority as a queen chosen by the ancestors and protected by the spirits. Alcohol played a key role, not as the poison itself, but as the sacred medium, the vessel, the ritual amplifier. You might be thinking, was she just cruel, or did she believe in it? That's where the scholarly debate gets thorny. Some historians paint Ranavalona as a tyrant, using religious ritual and alcohol-fueled trials to enforce absolute control. Others argue that she was preserving traditional Malagasy culture in the face of rising European influence, resisting colonization with every tool available, even the brutal ones. Perhaps she was both. Her reign saw Madagascar maintain independence while neighbouring regions fell. But it came at a staggering cost. And here's your odd, vivid fact. She reportedly oversaw the execution of tens of thousands, some say even more, often during public ceremonies where toaka gasi was poured over the earth as an offering before the killing. The alcohol wasn't for drinking. It was for the ancestors. It marked the earth. It warned the spirits that the blood was coming. Tonight the ceremony continues. After the drink is passed, speeches begin. Long, melodic, filled with poetry and threats. Ranavalona doesn't need to speak loudly. When she nods, people move. When she raises her cup, people tremble. When she pours it out onto the soil, everyone goes silent. The toaka burns in your belly, but it does something else too. It sharpens your awareness. Everything feels more vivid. The beat of the drums, the rustle of the trees, the watching eyes of her guards, who stand like statues with spears that gleam red in the firelight, you realise that you've stepped into a world where drinking isn't indulgence. It's communication between the Queen and her people, between the living and the dead. There's a story whispered among the court. Once, a noblewoman defied Ranavalona by refusing to participate in a ritual drinking. She claimed it was impure. Insulted, the Queen personally offered her a hornful of tawaka. When the woman refused again, Ranavalona ordered her thrown into a ravine. The next day, the Queen drank to her victory. No toast, just a long, satisfied gulp. Tonight, though, you survive. You drink when told, you nod when expected. The fire burns lower, and eventually Ranavalona vanishes into the dark the same way she arrived, soundlessly like a spirit returning to the forest. You wipe the sweat from your brow and realise you've passed some kind of test. Maybe not of loyalty or courage, maybe just of obedience. But you're still here, and your throat still burns with rice liquor and fear. You won't forget that taste. There's something oddly comforting about the heavy fog that rolls across the fields of England this morning, like the land itself is trying to keep a secret. You're no longer in a jungle or an ice palace, but rather the reserved, rose-trimmed quiet of 19th century Britain. You're stepping into the long, creaking corridors of Windsor Castle, the drapes drawn just so, the air cool and still, no shouting, no wild banquets, no spectacles of public punishment. Just a woman in black sitting in a straight-back chair, sipping something strong from a teacup that most definitely does not hold tea. Welcome to the world of Queen Victoria, where seduction is subtle, authority is absolute, and alcohol is the thing no one talks about. But no one ever stops pouring. She's not what you expect. You've heard the myths, of course. The matronly figure, the perpetually mourning widow, the queen who practically invented prudishness. But the woman seated in front of you is something else, razor-sharp, deeply observant, and far more attuned to the rhythms of power than her sombre reputation suggests. She's dressed entirely in mourning black as usual, and her face is calm, almost unreadable. A silver tray sits nearby with a china pot, delicate cups, and a small crystal decanter half filled with what you immediately realise is gin. She doesn't offer it right away. Victoria's a queen who waits to see if you're clever enough to notice that what she's drinking isn't Darjeeling. You are. She sees that you see it. Then, and only then, does she pour you a thimbleful without comment into your own cup. It's dry gin, piney, floral, and far stronger than its dainty container suggests. You sip and try not to cough. Her eyes flicker, amused. Victoria doesn't drink much, not publicly, but when she does, it's strategic. Her drink of choice shifts depending on the mood. Sherry when entertaining, Hakiyambing, port on holidays, whiskey during state visits to Scotland. But gin? Gin is for solitude, reflection, power beneath grief, and grief for her is a constant companion. After the death of Prince Albert, Victoria retreated into mourning so thoroughly it became political. Her black gowns, her veils, her refusal to attend public ceremonies, they were all expressions of sorrow, yes, but also statements. She controlled her image so tightly that the entire British Empire began to define femininity, restraint, and moral virtue by the way she held herself. And her glass. Here's a lesser-known truth. Victoria wasn't the dry, joyless figure the caricatures made her out to be. She loved rich food, music, travel, and she absolutely loved a stiff drink when she could get away with it. Her household records show a steady supply of alcohol delivered to her various residences, including crates of claret, casks of whiskey, and yes, bottles of gin distilled right in London. She especially favoured a pre-dinner cocktail of red wine mixed with whiskey, a concoction that would knock most people straight into next Tuesday. But for her, it was routine, a mood setter, a throne tamer. You begin to notice how methodical she is about it. Victoria doesn't drink to blur her thoughts. She drinks to focus them, to fortify her nerves before a difficult audience, to calm herself after a diplomatic dispute. Alcohol for her is both ritual and resource. She has no time for sloppiness and even less patience for those who mistake her silence for softness. The room is silent save for the occasional clink of a teaspoon against porcelain. A servant enters, delivers a letter, and leaves without a word. Victoria doesn't even glance at the man. She sips her gin again, then finally speaks about a new proposal from Parliament, about the tension in India, about how the Americans are simultaneously brilliant and absurd. You nod, sip, try not to say something stupid. Here's your quirky detail of the day. Queen Victoria had a liquor named after her, Victoria Gin, a floral, lavender-laced spirit inspired by the Queen's known fondness for perfumed liqueurs. It was a gift from the British distillers of the time, who knew well that nothing endorsed a bottle like a royal eyebrow raise. There's even a documented account of her gifting gin-infused jellies to visiting dignitaries disguised as delicate desserts, and watching them with soant merciless amusement as the strength of the treat slowly hit. But what scholars still puzzle over is whether Victoria's relationship with alcohol was personal or performative. Some argue that her measured consumption was another way she shaped her public identity, as a woman who could endure pain, outlive everyone, and remain composed while the entire empire revolved around her sorrow. Others say she used alcohol privately to ease the weight of a life that gave her a throne at 18 and buried her love too soon. Maybe it was both. Maybe the quiet sipping and the heavy gowns and the endless ritual of grief were all the tools she had to carve out some control over a life that was never truly hers. Today, sitting across from her in this quiet room, you begin to understand the scale of it. This isn't a queen on a throne of indulgence. This is a woman who has lost almost everyone she's ever loved and still wakes up each day to rule a kingdom. The gin is not about pleasure, it's about steadiness. She sets her cup down, not quite empty. The meeting is over, no fanfare, no farewell toast, just the soft glide of her skirts as she stands and exits, leaving you in a room that suddenly feels too large and too cold. You finish your own drink in silence. It tastes a little like grief, and a lot like resolve. It's hard to say if it's the salt in the air, or the music that hits you first, but you're not in Europe anymore. No marble halls or powdered wigs, no stone castles or velvet curtained drawing rooms. You're standing on the lanai of Iolani Palace, surrounded by the humid warmth of the Hawaiian breeze. The late 1800s sunlight filters through palm fronds, dapples across polished wood floors, and bathes everything in golden calm. But don't be fooled. Queen Liliuokalani, Hawaii's last monarch, is not throwing a party. She's holding court island style, the caporio, and that pineapple punch in your hand isn't just a refreshing drink, it's a quiet act of resistance. You're greeted with a lei, of course, something fragrant, plumeria or maybe pikake, and you're handed a chilled glass that immediately begins sweating in your palm. The colour is bright coral, almost glowing. It smells like sugarcane and citrus and something deeper, more herbaceous. You take a sip, sweet at first, then something else, something smoky, almost floral. There's rum in it, yes, but also intent. This isn't a punch bowl for casual drinking. It's a cocktail crafted by a queen who knows exactly how to turn hospitality into diplomacy. Liliuokalani sits nearby on a carved koa wood chair, fanning herself gently. She wears a dress that blends Hawaiian tradition and Victorian style, modest, high-collared, but with flowing sleeves and bold island patterns. Her expression is composed, her posture relaxed, but her eyes? All business. When she nods to you, it's not a pleasantry, it's permission. You begin to see it all for what it is, a gathering of cultural armour. Music lilts from a nearby trio playing slack-key guitar, guests chat in both Hawaiian and English, and the scent of roasting pork wafts through the breeze. This could easily pass for a royal garden party, but Liliuokalani has engineered it more like a soft protest. The drink in your hand, a symbol of what's at stake. Here's your historical grounding. In the late 19th century, American and European business interests were circling the Hawaiian Islands like sharks. Sugar plantations, trade routes, naval positioning, it all pointed to one outcome, annexation. And Liliuokalani, educated, multilingual, a composer of over 50 songs and a born political strategist, saw it coming. When her predecessor, King Kalakaua, died in 1891, she became queen and immediately began working to restore native power, proposing a new constitution that would give voting rights back to her people and limit foreign control. It did not go over well. The foreign businessmen, white landowners who'd been granted extraordinary power under the previous constitution, moved fast. They called themselves the Committee of Safety, as if that didn't sound ominous, and with support from US Marines and no real legal basis, they overthrew her government in 1893. But even in the face of that betrayal, Liliuokalani refused to order bloodshed. She stepped down temporarily, believing the US president would reverse the illegal coup. Spoiler, he didn't. Back at the palace, the punch keeps flowing. You notice how each guest who approaches her offers their drink differently, some with a toast, some with lowered eyes, some with the nervousness of people unsure if they're still part of a government. Liliuokalani accepts their offerings politely, but she drinks sparingly, always watching, always listening. Her restraint is deliberate. The queen doesn't drown her anger in alcohol, she preserves it. Here's your quirky detail. Liliuokalani, despite her royal duties and political stress, made time to experiment with flavours and drinks. Her household included cooks and mixologists who incorporated island fruits, pineapple, guava, passion fruit, into cocktails that blended Hawaiian ingredients with European techniques. Her personal favourites leaned toward fruit-forward punches with subtle rum bases and floral syrups. It wasn't just taste, it was cultural preservation in a glass. And her music, she composed some of it while imprisoned. After the failed counter-revolution of 1895, the Queen was arrested, charged with treason, for crimes she didn't commit, and held in a corner room of her own palace for 8 months. She wrote Aloha Oe long before that moment, but it took on new weight as the farewell song of a queen watching her kingdom unravel. And yes, during that house arrest, she was permitted to receive guests, under heavy restrictions. Even then she served tea, occasionally punch, always grace. Academics still debate how much of her public composure was political strategy, and how much was genuine belief in non-violence and diplomacy. Some argue she should have called for arms, resisted harder. Others say her legacy survives precisely because she chose not to fight with blood. Instead, she fought with her pen, her words, her image, and yes, her hospitality. Because every guest who walked away from one of her garden parties left with more than a buzz. They left with a story. A queen who smiled, who served drinks, who sang but who never ever gave up. That's seduction at its highest level. Not physical, not sexual, ideological. As the sun dips lower and the air cools slightly, Liliuokalani rises. She raises her glass. Not high, not showy, just enough. To the land, she says softly. To the people, always. And she drinks. You do too. The punch is warm now, stronger. You can taste the bitterness under the sweetness. Like memory. Like resistance that takes its time. Later. Long after the guests have gone and the guitars have quieted, you walk the palace grounds. The moonlight casts long shadows on the lawn. Somewhere in the dark, a single glass clinks softly against a wood railing. She's still there, still watching, still holding her place. Queen Liliuokalani was forced to relinquish her crown, but she never let go of her dignity, or her glass. The smell hits first, anise, fennel, and the faint metallic tang of iron from distant kettles. You're transported to the gilded ballrooms of the Austrian Empire, where the air is warm with candlelight and music drifts lazily across the polished parquet floors. At the centre of it all sits Empress Elisabeth of Austria, known to the world as Sisi, reclining in a manner that is as effortless as it is studied. You notice immediately, her gown is impossibly thin, almost painfully elegant, and her posture, always upright, always perfect, is a subtle declaration of authority and control. Sisi's relationship with alcohol is not boisterous or theatrical, it's precise, deliberate, and, in its own way, as controlling as her corsets. The first thing you're offered is a small crystal glass of fennel-infused white wine, light, aromatic, and sharp enough to wake your senses without shattering them. You take a cautious sip. The taste is cool, herbal, and almost medicinal. Perfect, you realise, for a woman obsessed with every detail of her life, from waistline to image to public perception. Sisi drinks slowly. You learn very quickly that the Empress's choice of beverage is as much about ritual as it is taste. She's not indulging, she's strategizing. Historically, Elisabeth was famous for her beauty routines, long rides across the countryside and strict diets. She exercised rigorously, took long walks in forests, and maintained a notorious waistline that was considered the epitome of imperial perfection. But what most outsiders don't realise is how intimately alcohol fit into her private rituals. A well-timed glass of fennel wine would calm her nerves before audiences with ministers or temper her anxiety before ceremonies that demanded perfection from every movement, every glance, every gesture. Here's the quirky detail. Sisi is rumoured to have consumed fennel wine not only for pleasure or ritual, but for its purported health benefits. Fennel was thought to aid digestion, control appetite, and even regulate mood. It's not just a drink, it's an accessory to her meticulous self-care. a calculated choice designed to complement her physical and emotional discipline. She wields her body, her feet, her hair, and yes, her cup with absolute precision. Drinking is an extension of control, and yet there is the scholarly debate. Some historians argue that Sisi's strict regimen, her diet, exercise, and carefully measured drinking was a form of anxiety management bordering on obsession. Others suggest it was a calculated projection of the imperial image, designed to awe foreign dignitaries and her subjects alike. Either way, the result is undeniable. A woman who made even private habits part of a larger strategy for influence. Tonight you observe her overseeing a small gathering of nobles in a private salon. She sips slowly, converses sparingly, and listens intensely. A conversation about court intrigue flares briefly, and Sisi's hand hovers lightly over her glass, signalling a pause in the discussion that no one dares to ignore. She does not need to raise her voice. The presence of the glass, the measured sip, and her gaze accomplish the work. Alcohol becomes a tool of authority, a silent punctuation mark in conversation, and a subtle reminder of her dominance. The room carries on around her. Laughter, the clink of fine porcelain, whispers of scandal, but she moves through it like a shadow with defined edges. Her eyes dart at the wine in her cup, then to the guests, always calculating. One sip, one nod, one pause, and the hierarchy of power is clear. You realise that Cecile has mastered an extraordinary balance, indulgence tempered by discipline, ritual disguised as habit. Her drinking is neither display nor seduction, it is precision at Sherbrooke, a quiet weapon of influence. By the time the evening ends, the candles burn low and the wine in her glass has barely diminished. Guests leave with the memory of her posture, her gaze, her subtle mastery of space and beverage. You linger, sipping the remnants of your own drink, feeling the herbal sip and sting, and the faint heat it leaves in your chest. Sisi rises, glances once at her remaining glass, and places it on the silver tray. There is no fanfare, no toast. The room feels emptier immediately, as though the gravity she exerts has left with her. You're left with one thought. She didn't just drink wine. She commanded it, bending even a simple cup to her will. The night is humid and fragrant, carrying a mixture of jasmine and the faint scent of rebellion. You're no longer in Vienna or Windsor. You've travelled to a quiet, dimly lit room in exile, where the political and personal collapse of a nation has left its queen in liminal space. Here sits Queen Soraya of Iran, elegant, sorrowful, and strikingly composed, holding a crystal glass that contains a cocktail forbidden in the country she once ruled. The drink is subtle, pomegranate juice, a splash of cognac, a whisper of saffron, but it is potent in its symbolism. Every sip is a defiance, a private reclamation of autonomy in a world that has stripped her of power. You notice how she holds the glass, not with the performative flourish of European monarchs, but with quiet intention, almost ritualistic. Each sip seems to map a boundary between what she can control and what she cannot. The room is sparsely decorated, the walls lined with muted tapestries, a few personal mementos, and a solitary photograph of her country. Outside, the city hums, unaware of the delicate balancing act occurring behind these doors. Historically, Soraya's story is tragic yet emblematic of political and personal exile. As queen consort to Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, she wielded influence discreetly, often navigating the treacherous waters of court politics while pursuing causes related to social welfare and women's education. Her fall from favour was swift, forced by both political manoeuvring and the rigid social structures that constrained women in her position. Alcohol in exile becomes her private conduit for ritual, contemplation and control, a link to the life she once had but cannot reclaim fully. The cocktail in your hand mirrors her duality. Sweet floral notes dance lightly on your tongue. But the cognac carries a sharp warmth that reminds you this is not mere indulgence. It is measured, considered a private ceremony. She raises her glass in silence, as if acknowledging the ghosts of the past without inviting the present to intrude. It's a quiet act of sovereignty, performed without audience, yet intensely potent. Here's a fringe fact. Some accounts suggest that Soraya experimented with clandestine cocktail recipes while in exile, blending native Persian flavours with European spirits in secret gatherings that her attendants, loyal but discreet, helped prepare. It was not merely for pleasure, it was an intellectual exercise, a method of maintaining cultural and personal identity amid displacement. The drinks became a form of coded expression, signalling moods, intentions and allegiances without words, and yet there remains a scholarly debate surrounding her private consumption. Was it primarily therapeutic, a means to cope with grief, loss and displacement, or was it a deliberate tool for psychological endurance and personal autonomy? Many modern historians lean toward a combination of both, suggesting that the act of drinking, in her carefully structured ritual, allowed her to exercise the very authority that had been denied to her in court. You watch as she converses softly with a trusted confidant. The exchange is understated, yet every movement, gesture and sip is intentional. Her hand hovers over her glass, a subtle punctuation of thought, a visual reminder of her inner sovereignty. There is no showmanship, no pretense of dominance, only meticulous, calm command over the space she inhabits. As the night deepens, the city outside quiets. The candlelight flickers across her face, illuminating eyes that have known both the heights of influence and the depths of exile. She takes a final sip from her glass, tilts it slightly in acknowledgement, and sets it aside. There is no fanfare, no toast, just a quiet declaration. She remains queen of herself, even if she no longer rules a nation. You leave the room with the lingering taste of pomegranate and cognac on your tongues, and the feeling that sovereignty can be exercised in silence as much as in spectacle. Soraya's court may be small, intimate and hidden, but it is complete, and you realize that sometimes the quietest sips carry the greatest weight. The room smells faintly of roasted meats and aged wine, a familiar scent that carries the weight of celebration and subtle manoeuvring. You've returned to Europe, stepping into the grand dining hall of a Habsburg palace, where gilded mirrors and towering candelabras reflect both light and ambition. Today you're witnessing one of the most strategic uses of alcohol in royal alliances, the Habsburg wedding feasts, where brides and grooms weren't just uniting families, they were sealing political fates, all under the watchful eyes of carefully poured wine. You sit at a long, lacquered table, goblet in hand, trying to absorb the scale of influence flowing through these rituals. The hall is vast. Servants glide like shadows, lifting pitchers of Bordeaux and Rhine wine with impeccable timing. The food is opulent, from roasted swan to candied fruits and golden pastries, but your attention is fixed on the cups. Each pour carries significance. Red wine from Burgundy signals loyalty. White wine from the Moselle whispers sophistication and refinement. Spiced mulled wine denotes celebration and strategic blessing. At this table, drinking is not indulgence, it's a subtle negotiation. You sip cautiously, aware that your glass is as much a political instrument as it is a refreshment. Historically, Habsburg weddings were often less about romance and more about diplomacy. Marriages united territories, prevented wars, and consolidated power across Europe. The wine at these feasts wasn't just a drink, it was an essential part of ceremony, symbolizing alliance, obedience, and the health of the dynasty. The bride might toast to peace, the groom to prosperity, and every guest had a role to play, often monitored by the subtle tilt of a goblet or the careful selection of a vintage. Wine literally lubricated the wheels of empire. Here's a curious fact. At some Habsburg weddings, the queen consort or bride would commission custom wines for the occasion, often blended to reflect the colours of the respective dynasties or to carry herbs believed to inspire fidelity and harmony. These weren't mere beverages, they were narrative tools, carefully engineered to communicate loyalty, ambition, and virtue. The act of drinking was a rehearsal of allegiance, a silent affirmation that everyone at the table was aligned, or at least appearing to be. And yet historians debate how much of this ceremony was genuinely symbolic versus performative theatre. Did the guests truly interpret the vintage of wine as a coded message about political alliances, or was it a luxury of courtly refinement that simply impressed the untrained eye? Some scholars argue that the Habsburgs deliberately used ritualized drinking to maintain control over potentially fractious nobility, while others suggest that most participants were simply swept up in the grandeur, oblivious to the subtleties. Either way, the message was clear. Your place at the table and your understanding of the protocol was a gauge of your power. Tonight, as you watch the bride lift her glass, you notice how the men around the table follow her lead, toasting with deference yet calculating each motion, each gulp. The groom drinks carefully, as if each sip carries weight beyond simple enjoyment. Courtiers watch one another for signs of overindulgence or hesitation. One misstep, a stumble, a delayed toast, a poorly timed sip, and alliances could be questioned, reputations subtly undermined. The stakes are not the wine itself, but what the wine enables: subtle persuasion, observation, and the soft exercise of influence. A lighter, almost quirky detail: some feasts included the practice of wine-tasting duels, where guests were challenged to identify vintages blindfolded. Success demonstrated education, refinement, and attention to detail. Failure suggested ignorance or weakness. The emperor or empress often used the results to determine informal social rankings among courtiers. You sip your own glass cautiously, wondering if this is meant as a test for you, too. As the night progresses, laughter rises, soft music threads through the conversation, and every goblet is refilled with the precision of ritual. You notice how the bride occasionally tilts her cup toward particular nobles, creating micro-alliances in the air, invisible to all but the practiced eye. You realize that in this room, every sip carries information, every toast is a performance of loyalty, and in the subtle choreography of wine and etiquette, power flows like liquid, invisible yet tangible, touching every guest present. By the time dessert is served, fruit tarts, sugared almonds, marzipan figures, the subtle network of influence is fully enacted. Those who understand the signals are quietly elevated. Those who misstep risk fading into the background. You drink once more, letting the faint sweetness coat your tongue, feeling the weight of centuries of calculated power distilled into every goblet. And as you look around, it's clear. In the Habsburg halls, wine is not just indulgence, it is diplomacy, memory, and control in liquid form. The masks are heavier than the perfume. You step into the candlelit chaos of an Elizabethan hall, the air thick with wood smoke, roasted meats, and the faintly sweet scent of spiced wine. The walls are hung with tapestries depicting knights, mythical beasts, and allegorical victories, but the real spectacle tonight is the performance taking place on the polished floor, a Tudor masque, and presiding over it all, of course, is Queen Elisabeth of Castile, whose mastery of ceremony extends beyond political theatre into the intoxicating realm of flirtation and subtle manipulation. You're handed a goblet of mulled wine, warm and spiced with cinnamon, cloves, and a touch of honey. The steam curls upward, mingling with the smoke from the hearth and the subtle aroma of lavender from the Queen's perfumed gloves. You take a sip. It warms your chest and loosens your tongue, but not enough to forget your place. In Elizabeth's presence, even indulgence is regulated. Every sip, every tilt of the glass, is a subtle measure of attention, loyalty, and wit. Historically, Elizabeth's masques were elaborate productions featuring music, dance, allegorical storytelling, and no small amount of political messaging. They weren't just entertainment, they were coded exercises in diplomacy and hierarchy. The wine served at these events was equally deliberate, mulled, sweetened, and spiced to perfection. It lubricated conversation, tested nerves, and encouraged the flow of praise or confession. Guests drank to appear joyous, clever, or pious, while Elizabeth observed with a careful, calculating eye. Here's a quirky little-known fact. During some masques, Elizabeth would orchestrate drinking games as part of the performance. Courtiers were challenged to guess riddles, complete dances, or recite verses while holding their wine. Failure meant embarrassment, minor social penalties, or at the very least her amused attention, which could be a crueler fate than public shame. The Queen's blend of spectacle and scrutiny kept everyone on edge. Tipsy, yes, but never comfortable. Scholars still debate whether Elizabeth's games were primarily about amusement, diplomacy, or subtle seduction. Some argue that her careful regulation of alcohol was a tool to maintain dominance, keeping male courtiers simultaneously charmed and off balance. Others suggest the games allowed her to gauge loyalty and intelligence, reading character through how each person handled both wine and wit. Either way, the outcome was clear. Elizabeth retained power without showing overt force, using the social lubricant of alcohol to amplify her authority. Tonight, as you navigate the hall, you notice how the courtiers position themselves around Elizabeth. Those who drink too quickly appear reckless, those who hesitate seem timid. The wine in your hand suddenly feels like an extension of yourself, a test of judgment, as much as of tolerance. The Queen, gloved and jewelled, moves among them, nodding, tilting her head, sipping with measured grace, all while sending subtle messages of approval or quiet disfavour. At one point, a young noble attempts to flirt, leaning closer than decorum allows, mug in hand. Elisabeth smiles, a small sharp curve of her lips that carries both invitation and warning. She sips her wine slowly, deliberately. Watching the man squirm between eagerness and caution, the mulled wine, warm and fragrant, functions as a third party in the conversation, softening inhibitions while highlighting gaps in perception. Every observer, including you, senses the invisible choreography at play. And then comes the mask itself. Dancers move in geometric patterns, allegorical figures enact moral lessons, and music fills the vaulted hall. Wine flows continuously. Elisabeth observes silently, occasionally sipping, occasionally nodding, always measuring. The entire evening is a subtle interplay of power, charm, and ritualized intoxication. A carefully orchestrated game where every sip can be a strategy and every gesture can be a trap. As the final performance concludes, the audience applauds, the candles gutter, and the fire dims. You take one last sip of the now cool mulled wine. The warmth lingers, carrying the echoes of laughter, applause, and unspoken hierarchies. Elisabeth rises, glides past her courtiers, and disappears into a side corridor without a word, leaving the hall buzzing with the quiet energy of social conquest. And you realize, tonight, wine wasn't just for pleasure. It was diplomacy, seduction, and survival rolled into one. The air is thick with incense and spice, carrying the faint aroma of rosewater and cardamom over the tiled floors. You've travelled east, beyond the European courts, into the Mughal Zenana, the private quarters of India's royal women. The corridors are narrow, draped with richly embroidered textiles, and lined with attendants who move like shadows. You're aware immediately that this isn't a public performance. It's a world behind screens, literally and figuratively, where alcohol and seduction are wielded in whispers and subtle gestures rather than in grand gestures. A cup is placed before you, warm, spiced wine with clove and saffron. Its aroma hits you like an invitation and a warning simultaneously. The Queen and her attendants sip carefully, almost ritualistically. This isn't for indulgence, and it's not merely hospitality. Alcohol here is a tool of control, subtly reinforcing hierarchies and alliances within the harem. Each drink is measured, each toast deliberate. Those who pour it, serve it, or consume it in the wrong order risk social misstep or even disfavour. The wine, thick and aromatic, functions as a silent language, a way to communicate loyalty, status, and obedience. You take a cautious sip, feeling its warmth spread through your chest while trying not to betray unfamiliarity with the rituals. Historically, the Mughal Zenana was both sanctuary and seat of power. While the emperor held public authority, the women of the Zenana often influenced succession, diplomacy, and court alliances. Alcohol, rarely but strategically served, played a subtle role in these power dynamics. Spiced wines were infused not only for taste but as a social instrument. A queen might signal favour, test a lady-in-waiting's discretion, or observe the loyalties of visiting dignitaries through careful ceremonial drinking. Here's a fringe fact. Some Mughal queens used their wine to discreetly deliver medicinal herbs or aphrodisiacs, designed to manipulate moods or test loyalties without anyone outside the Zenana noticing. Recipes were closely guarded, sometimes written in code or memorized entirely. The wine was never just a drink, it was diplomacy, observation, and sometimes an invisible weapon. Scholars debate the exact influence these women wielded. Were they merely observers and caretakers of domestic order? Or did they shape empire policy through subtle interventions, often over glasses of spiced wine? Some argue that accounts exaggerate their power as a way to romanticize the exoticism of the harem. Others note documented cases where queens' alliances and decisions directly impacted succession, military decisions, and marriage treaties. The wine, though, always facilitated these interactions, smoothing social friction or sharpening insight, depending on who drank and how. Tonight, the ceremony continues. A visiting diplomat is offered wine. He hesitates, then drinks, signalling obedience and acceptance. The Queen observes silently, noting his manner, the tilt of his head, the speed of his sip. These tiny gestures, trivial to an outsider, carry immense weight here. Your own hand trembles slightly as you lift your cup, realizing you are part of this delicate choreography, a participant in the Zenana's quiet, potent diplomacy. Later, after the wine has been poured and the ritual complete, the Queen leans back, a small smile playing at her lips. The attendants retreat, the candles flicker lower, and the space becomes simultaneously more intimate and more guarded. You realize the true function of this alcohol. It isn't indulgence, it's a lens. It reveals character, loyalty, and strategy all at once. Each sip is a test, and each cup emptied carries judgment. By the end of the evening, the wine has done its work. Allies are noted, rivals are flagged, and even the quiet observer, yourself, has learned something about the silent power at play. Here in the secluded heart of the palace, influence is measured in tilts of a goblet, pauses between sips, and the subtlety of who pours and who receives. The final ember of the candle guttering in its holder marks the close of the ritual. The Queen retires, leaving the warm scent of the clove and saffron behind, a trace of authority, intoxicating yet unseen. The scent of wine-soaked red velvet and candle smoke drifts toward you as you enter the grand halls of 16th century France. You've stepped into the life of Queen Margo, Margaret of Valois, notorious for her charm, scandal, and political cunning. The space is alive with chatter, the clatter of goblets, and the soft clinking of silverware. Every footstep, every whisper, carries potential intrigue. Margo sits at the head of the table, a delicate smile playing across her lips, her fingers drumming lightly against a crystal wineglass filled with ruby-red burgundy. To watch her is to witness the seamless fusion of seduction, diplomacy, and strategy. She doesn't sip immediately. First she observes. Every noble, every soldier, every ambassador is measured in her gaze. The wine is not mere indulgence, it's a tool, a subtle instrument to read intentions, assess loyalties, and even gauge fear. You take a sip yourself, a mixture of red wine and crushed berries, sweet at first with a lingering bitterness. It warms your chest but sharpens your awareness. You understand immediately that this is not a party, it's a battlefield disguised in candlelight. Historically, Queen Margo was famed for her strategic marriages and alliances. Her union with Henry of Navarre, later Henry IV, was designed to ease religious tensions between Catholics and Protestants in France. Yet the wedding feast became infamous, an intoxicating mixture of celebration, diplomacy, and tension, where wine flowed freely, masking cautious glances and veiled threats. Margot's clever manipulation of these gatherings demonstrated that alcohol could be a weapon. It encouraged openness among allies, loosened tongues, and revealed hidden ambitions in a room otherwise tense with etiquette. Here's a curious detail. Margo reportedly orchestrated a dramatic wine toast during a tense banquet, ensuring that certain ministers drank first and others last, subtly signalling favour or suspicion. Guests were acutely aware that their placement and behaviour at the table had ramifications far beyond the immediate celebration. Wine became a social barometer, revealing truths that words could not, while maintaining the veneer of festivity. Scholars debate the extent to which her manipulation was deliberate versus circumstantial. Was Margo consciously engineering courtly intoxication to maintain political advantage, or were her actions simply a product of inherited knowledge about etiquette and influence? Contemporary accounts suggest both. She was deeply aware of the social and political capital embedded in every sip and toast, yet she also benefited from the existing culture of ceremonial wine drinking among the French elites. Tonight, as you navigate the crowd, you observe the courtiers' reactions. Some laugh a little too loudly, a glass raised in an attempt to curry favour. Others hesitate, fingers trembling around the stems of their goblets. Margot's eyes sweep the room, reading subtle micro-expressions, noticing small slips of posture, the speed of consumption, the tilt of a head. She lifts her own wine, finally sipping. The effect is immediate. Conversation tightens, laughter softens, attention sharpens. She has reminded everyone, without a word, who holds power. The room hums with music, masked dancers swirl through the space, and Margo occasionally tilts her glass toward a particular noble, a tiny gesture loaded with unspoken meaning. One sip is admiration, another is warning. The wine becomes a medium of coded communication, its warmth spreading through the body but also through the invisible network of influence Margo deftly controls. As the night deepens, Margo rises gracefully. She doesn't toast again, she doesn't need to. The hall, still illuminated by flickering candelabras, has already absorbed her intent. Guests leave with their perceptions subtly reshaped, their alliances quietly confirmed or questioned. Wine has been both sword and shield tonight, wielded with elegance, precision, and deadly subtlety. And you, glass in hand, recognize the lesson. In Queen Margot's world, alcohol is never mere pleasure. It is power distilled, influence poured, and strategy sipped with grace. You swallow the last of your wine and feel the heat spread, not from intoxication, but from understanding. Saltwater tang and the scent of rum hit your senses before the ships even come into view. You've crossed the Atlantic and stepped onto the deck of a pirate ship in the Caribbean, where the sea's spray and the swing of the rigging mingle with the sharp sweetness of spiced rum. Here reigns Anne Bonny, notorious pirate queen, rogue, and master of intoxicating intimidation. She leans casually against the mast, hair tangled from wind and storms, eyes bright with challenge, and a mug of rum in hand that seems to burn with the promise of chaos. The alcohol here is not a gesture of diplomacy, nor a ritualized tool of state. It is survival, camaraderie, and intimidation rolled into one. The deck is alive with the crew, a mix of hardened men and desperate rogues, all of whom defer subtly yet unmistakably to Anne. She raises her mug, takes a slow sip, and surveys the horizon. The rum is sharp, spiced, and hot on your throat, leaving a trail of warmth as it slides down. You sip cautiously. Every ounce of it seems to carry both fire and confidence, the taste of rebellion distilled. On a pirate ship, alcohol is both reward and risk. Too much dull skill, too little signals weakness. Bonny's mastery is knowing precisely how and when to drink. Historically, Anne Bonny was a force in a male-dominated world, feared for her cunning and ferocity. She sailed alongside Calico Jack Rackham, sometimes disguised as a man, challenging conventions at every turn. Her consumption of rum was legendary, not simply for indulgence, but as a measure of courage. Stories tell of her tossing back drink after drink before battle, laughing while her crew nervously followed suit. Rum here was a social equalizer, a test of nerve, loyalty, and audacity. A quirky detail, Anne reportedly carried 2 flasks at all times, one for herself, strong and fiery, and one filled with water diluted with rum for crew members less experienced with the spirit. She would encourage the men to drink heartily, but always maintained control over the ship, the crew, and herself. The alcohol became a tool of performance and power, a way to bond with pirates while subtly reminding them who commanded the deck. Scholars debate whether Anne's persona as a rum-sipping, sword-wielding pirate was fully strategic or partly mythologized after the fact. Some argue she was a shrewd operator, using theatrics, alcohol, and cross-dressing to secure respect and authority. Others suggest that her legend was amplified in pamphlets and ballads, projecting audacious rebellion onto a figure who may have been more pragmatic than theatrical. Regardless, the narrative endured, cementing her as a symbol of rogue autonomy and intoxicating charm. The ship rocks gently as night falls. The lanterns cast flickering shadows, the ocean groans against the hull, and Bonny takes another sip, then gestures for the crew to gather. Laughter, songs, and the clatter of tankards rise in unison. She leans close to a brash new sailor, whispering a warning with one hand on his shoulder, the other holding her rum. It's both invitation and intimidation, showing that influence can be measured not in laws or decrees, but in shared drinks and shared danger. By midnight, the crew is half drunk, singing, swaying, and plotting minor mutinies that Anne effortlessly suppresses. She moves among them like a conductor, measuring allegiance through glances, posture, and tolerance of her liquor. The rum is never casual. Every sip is a social signal, every toast a reinforcement of hierarchy, every smile a calculated encouragement. As you stagger slightly on the deck, tasting the sweetness and burn of spiced rum, it's clear Anne Bonny's world was intoxicating not just in spirit but in power. Her mug isn't just drink. It's authority, daring, and survival distilled. You sip one last time, the fire spreading through your chest, and realize you're witnessing strategy in liquid form. The smell of gin and cigarette smoke hits you the moment you enter the studio lot, mingling with the faint perfume of stage makeup and hot lights. You're no longer on a battlefield palace or pirate ship. You've arrived in 1930s Hollywood, where glamour and intimidation are served with equal measure, often in martini glasses. At the center of this glittering chaos sits a queen of a different sort. Bette Davis, not a monarch of blood and crown, but a ruler of the silver screen and studio lot alike. Her gaze cuts through the haze like a spotlight. She holds her cocktail with a casual elegance, swirling it, taking measured sips, as if each movement were part of a script no one else has read. The studio's alive with noise, typewriters, gossip, footsteps in heels, the distant roar of cameras warming up, but Bette moves with an authority that demands attention without needing to raise her voice. Her martini, gin heavy, vermouth delicate, and a twist of lemon, is almost a weapon in her hand. You take a sip yourself, the sharp, dry taste settling in your chest. The alcohol doesn't make you bold, it makes you alert. Every gesture, every word, every glance might be interpreted, recorded, or reported. And you realise that in this Hollywood court, observation is survival. Historically, Bette Davis was renowned for her fierce independence, her refusal to be typecast, and her ability to challenge studio executives in a system designed to control female actors. Alcohol, though often overlooked in accounts of her career, played a subtle role in her negotiations and social navigation. A well-timed drink at a studio party could open doors, ease tensions, or reveal character, much like the ceremonial wines and spirits of queens past. Bette wielded it judiciously, blending charm, intimidation, and social strategy with every sip. Here's a quirky detail. Bette reportedly enjoyed her cocktails during script readings and meetings with directors, sometimes tossing off witty barbs mid-sip, leaving male colleagues off balance and unsure whether to laugh or cower. She was known to host small gatherings in her dressing room, where martinis and whiskey were served alongside pointed critiques of scripts, costumes, and co-stars. Guests quickly learned that the drink wasn't indulgence, it was a test of wit, composure, and readiness to negotiate her terms. Scholars and biographers still debate whether Davis's use of alcohol was primarily social lubrication, an instrument of power, or both. Some argue that it allowed her to navigate a male-dominated studio system with a veneer of sophistication, giving her the leverage to push back against oppressive contracts. Others suggest that the drink served as ritualized moments of focus and confidence, helping her perform and command attention in a world rife with competition and precarious fame. Either way, the alcohol amplified her presence, rather than diminishing it. Tonight, as she moves across the studio floor, Bette lifts her martini in passing to a director who has dared to challenge her casting choice. The gesture is casual, but it carries authority. Recognition, amusement, and quiet admonishment all at once. The director nods, aware that compliance is wise. Across the room, co-stars murmur, whisper, and sip their own drinks, gauging the atmosphere. Bette's glass is a metronome of influence, her sips marking tempo in a world built on ambition and rivalry. By the end of the evening, the cocktail glasses are low. Conversation has lulled to murmurs, and Bette steps out onto the studio balcony, looking down over the lot. She sips once more, savouring the sharp bite, then sets the glass aside. Her gaze lingers on the city lights, confident, commanding, untouchable. In this realm of celluloid dreams and merciless ambition, alcohol was never just drink. It was a tool of social power, a subtle weapon of charisma, and a symbol of sovereignty without crown or throne. You finish the last of your martini, tasting the dry gin and lemon, and realise you've just witnessed a modern queen at work. Ruthless, strategic, intoxicating, and entirely in control, the room smells of polished wood, oak barrels, and the faintly sweet tang of fermented grapes. You're back in the presence of actual royalty, but this time the stakes are public perception and national pride rather than intrigue or conquest. It's modern Spain, and you're stepping into a carefully curated dinner hosted by Queen Letitia. Elegant, composed, and commanding attention without the weight of historical legend. The wine in your hand is Rioja, deep and ruby-coloured, with aromas of cherry, vanilla, and tobacco. One sip, and it's immediately apparent. Here, alcohol is subtle, ceremonial, and diplomatic, an instrument of statecraft rather than indulgence. Letitia greets the room with warmth but not effusiveness. Every smile, nod, and movement has precision, a combination of grace, poise, and strategic observation. The wine is poured with careful attention to vintage, temperature, and pairing with the courses of the meal. In a modern palace, there are fewer whispers of betrayal but still layers of diplomacy, influence, and expectation. A toast is offered. You raise your glass. The first sip hits like velvet, with the quiet reminder that even in 21st century monarchies, the ceremonial function of alcohol endures. Historically, Queen Letitia has navigated a monarchy in a republic, balancing public scrutiny, media pressure, and national expectations. She doesn't need alcohol for authority or intimidation. Her influence derives from poise, intellect, and careful public engagement. But as in centuries past, wine plays a subtle role in courtly gatherings. It facilitates conversation, softens tensions, and signals refinement. It's a reminder that even in modern times, shared drinks remain a tool for connection, negotiation, and perception management. Here's a curious detail. Letitia reportedly takes an active interest in the wines served at state dinners, collaborating with sommeliers to ensure that each pairing honours both Spanish tradition and the diplomatic nuance of each occasion. The selection of Rioja, Ribera del Duero, or Albarino isn't arbitrary. It's part of a careful orchestration of cultural diplomacy. A well-chosen vintage communicates pride, sophistication, and national heritage in a language all guests can understand. Scholars of contemporary monarchy debate the role of ceremonial consumption in modern courts. Some argue it's purely symbolic, vestigial from centuries of ritualized hospitality. Others note that these gatherings remain subtly performative. Who drinks, who refills, who gestures with their glass. All still carries social weight, signalling favour, respect, or distance. Even in an era of press coverage and formal protocols, wine continues to act as a soft instrument of influence. Tonight, the Queen makes her rounds with quiet efficiency. She sips lightly, smiles lightly, and observes keenly. The wine flows steadily among guests, facilitating polite discussion and measured laughter. Every gesture is calibrated, a tilt of the glass, a nod toward a diplomat, a brief toast. These are small but powerful signals in the careful choreography of modern monarchy. You sip your own Rioja and feel its depth, warmth, and subtle strength. There is no intoxication here, only awareness. You notice the attention with which courtiers and foreign guests treat each gesture, aware that Letitia's control is less about drama and more about consistent, subtle authority. Alcohol here does not manipulate, it clarifies, facilitates and elevates. As the evening winds down, candles gutter low, and conversation softens. Letitia lifts her glass one final time, a gesture of respect and unity, then sets it down. The room exhales. The ritual has concluded, influence measured, and bonds quietly reinforced. You sip the last of your wine, appreciating the continuity of centuries-old lessons. Power, grace, and strategy are often distilled in a single, deliberate drink. You're sitting back now, the room dimmed, and the faint hum of conversation fading to a quiet memory. It's a rare moment to breathe, reflect, and trace the threads connecting every queen you've witnessed on this journey. From Cleopatra's perfumed wine barges on the Nile to Letitia's contemporary Rioja dinners, the story is clear. Alcohol has been far more than indulgence. It is a medium, a tool, and often a weapon, a way to assert control, build alliances, test loyalty, and even seduce without her touching. Every sip, every tilt of a glass, every carefully orchestrated toast has carried power distilled. You take a small sip from the last glass in front of you, tasting a little of every era. Spice, honey, citrus, smoke, and fruit, all blending into a single, intoxicating narrative. Historically, queens wielded alcohol strategically, whether in formal diplomacy, ritualized feasts, or clandestine court intrigue. Cleopatra's wine was spectacle, Boudica's mead a rallying cry, Theodora's mulled concoctions a blend of charm and authority. Catherine de Medici weaponized poisoned cups and ceremonial wine, while Elisabeth I's measured sips kept male courtiers in suspense. Nzinga's palm wine tested loyalty and courage. Christina of Sweden's brandy became both social lubricant and statement. Marie Antoinette and Anna of Russia turned excess into theatre. Catherine the Great curated and utilised spirits to maintain her empire. Alcohol in these hands was never merely drink, it was strategy, and the pattern continues. Queen Ranavalona's rice-based toaka enforced loyalty and ritual. Queen Victoria's gin bolstered nerves and reflected her carefully controlled image. Liliuokalani's pineapple punch subtly asserted cultural sovereignty. Sisi's fennel wine reflected disciplined personal control, and Soraya's clandestine cocktails signified autonomy and subtle resistance. Even ceremonial wine at Habsburg weddings, Tudor masques, and Mughal Zenanas functioned as coded instruments of influence. Modern queens like Bette Davis in Hollywood or Letitia of Spain continue to wield drinks, whether martini, cocktail, or rioja, as tools of negotiation, perception, and authority. Across centuries, alcohol has been a medium through which power, diplomacy, and personality are broadcast and tested. The quirky or fringe details in each case reveal how nuanced this power really is. Cleopatra dissolved pearls in wine for spectacle. Nzinga's palm wine sometimes included blood in ritual. Christina's exile cocktails doubled as intellectual experiments. Catherine de Medici's astrologically timed wine and wine-tasting duels were as much strategy as indulgence. Historians debate the motivations, the morality, and the actual effect of these practices, but the evidence of ritualized, calculated drinking as an extension of influence is undeniable. Each queen transformed a common beverage into a vehicle of authority. Seduction, or both? The open scholarly debates further illuminate the subtleties. Was Cleopatra's charm political theatre or genuine allure? Did Boudicca's mead inspire courage or simply ritualistic fervour? Was Marie Antoinette decadent or misrepresented? Did Elisabeth V's measured consumption reflect strategy or personality? These questions remind you that power is often both performance and essence, and alcohol has long been the medium through which it flows. As you set your empty glass down, the echo of clinking goblets and whispered strategies seems to linger, a soft reminder of centuries where liquid courage, sweetness, and burn intertwined with ambition. You realize that every queen, across time and geography, mastered a version of the same lesson. Power is as much about perception and ritual as it is about strength. Alcohol simply amplifies it. It lubricates conversation, sharpens observation, and creates opportunity for influence, seduction, or enforcement. From Nile to Stockholm, Versailles to Hawaii, the story is unmistakable. A queen's glass is never empty of strategy. Now, dim the lights, feel the warmth of history settle around you, and let the echoes of these queens' carefully measured sips carry you gently towards sleep. You've witnessed empires rise and fall, alliances forged and broken, and power distilled into liquid form. Every sip was a lesson, every toast a declaration, every cup a quiet assertion of sovereignty that transcends centuries. And in the quiet, as the final candle flickers, you feel the weight of that lesson settle comfortably in your chest.